Welcome to Solidity Galaxy Brain. Today, my guest is Steve Klebanoff. Steve has been developing Solidity contracts for several years, first at 0x, then as an independent developer artist, and now as a member of PartyDAO, creators of the collective NFT bidding and fractionalization Dapp PartyBid. In this episode, Steve shares stories about his early days in crypto, writing ARB bots against EtherDelta, and the 2 years he spent as tech lead at DEX Protocol 0x. We get into the nitty-gritty on 3 of Steve's projects: the Bronx Zoo, a fractionalized Cryptovoxels zoo plot; Rats.art, a free art-for-art NFT trading portal; and Solvency, his NFT collaboration with WebGL artist Ezra Miller. We cover a lot of other topics, from trash art to Opensea's API, and even some new PartyBid features. I hope you enjoy the show. Steve, thanks for joining me on Solidity Galaxy Brain.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I guess the best place to get started is what were you up to before we met? We met sometime in, I think, early 2021, something like that. But I know you had this whole life before, right, at 0x.
Yeah, definitely. So I was like a hobbyist in Ethereum while working like a traditional job as like a staff software engineer at a SaaS company. But I got really into Ethereum in like late 2016, early 2017, and first started off as just like an interesting thing that I was researching, and bought some ETH and watched it rise and fall in value. But then the things really changed for me when I actually started using Ethereum to interact with dApps. And the first dApp that I used was EtherDelta, like the OG decentralized exchange back in the day. And that really showed me the power of Ethereum smart contracts and what it means to have like immutable, censorship resistant code running 24/7 on an open blockchain. So I was like buying and selling a variety of altcoins, and prior to using EtherDelta, I was used to using Binance, and I had frustrations with Binance where it's like, man, Binance goes down. I'm worried about them custodying my funds because there's been plenty of centralized exchange hacks that have gone on like around that time that made me uneasy. And there's sometimes when I really want to trade, but like Binance might be down and they won't let me execute that trade. So when I started and there was only a subset of assets that I could trade on there. So when I saw EtherDelta, flaws and all, I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like I know that my funds are custodied by an open source smart contract. I know that as long as the Ethereum blockchain is running, like I'll be able to trade. And I can also trade any asset that I want for better or for worse, right? So that just showed me some real material benefits of these decentralized applications. And that got me really, really hooked. And I started working on some arbitrage across decentralized exchanges and centralized exchanges, wrote some API integrations with both EtherDelta and then 0x at the time. Was really impressed with the code that 0x had, and ended up joining there and working there full time, where I worked at 0x full time for about 2 years before going independent to pursue some other ventures. But during that time at 0x, I definitely learned a lot and have like a huge amount of respect for that team.
So when you first discovered, like, you were trading on Binance and EtherDelta, that was like 2017, 18, something like that?
Yeah, 2017.
And yeah, I never used EtherDelta, so it's like a predecessor to Uniswap, basically.
It was more of like but it was like all order book based. It was more of the 0x style model where and it had some differences. It was just it was like a order. It was actually off chain orders. So these orders were stored in some centralized database, but it was like on chain settlement. And they had a standard UI that was pretty janky, and also it like got hacked at one point. So like even back then, just for like security, I was like downloading their minified source code and always running a local copy instead of using the one hosted on their site because I was afraid of the site getting compromised. And that did happen. But it was just like it was an order book based DEX with off-chain orders. And it was pretty funny because there'd be a lot of fat finger orders that arbitrage bots would take advantage of as well, because there's no validation on the front end. So people might try to sell something for like 0.6 ETH and fat finger like 0.06 ETH. And there were a lot of losses that happened on there as well. And as well as big market inefficiencies between EtherDelta and the centralized exchanges, because it was only like a relatively small group of hobbyists that were using EtherDelta. And that's what I think like allowed for some of the market inefficiencies that I was able to take advantage of at the time.
That's so funny. So basically the original Bored Apes. But actually, one thing okay, I want to know about
Also,
Zero X.
one more note.
Yeah.
One more note about the original Bored Apes. Like they also literally allowed an ability, if you didn't want to use MetaMask, you could paste in your seed, like your private key directly into the app. But like it worked, and like it didn't actually send it off anywhere until like for a few days it got hacked, and it was. So that's the other similarity to Bored Apes, is that they have you pasting your private keys everywhere.
What was that most recent, the DeFi company that got caught asking people to input their seed phrase? I don't remember. It was like,
oh, I saw that. I don't remember who that was, but yeah, I did see that was an option for logging in. So I guess that's still happening today, surprisingly enough.
Actually, what it really reminded me of, from my personal experience, is Arweave. Actually, where you at least back in the day when I was playing with it in the summer 2021, you just dragged in your private key, right?
There's a JSON file they expect you to download, and then like in the early like versions of it, you would just like drag and drop that JSON file into a web application to interact with Arweave.
It's interesting because I guess Ethereum was the same not so long before I got involved, but just didn't have to experience that part. Okay, so my experience of 0x is primarily through Matcha, which I use and love. I guess I've been thinking lately about sort of MEV stuff, if I should be thinking about that. But what did you get up to at 0x? Were you working on Matcha yourself?
I was working on some things that plugged into to Matcha, but when I first started working there, it was still pretty early, and we were working on a thing called 0x Instant, which was like a little pluggable widget that you could put into any site that like allowed the facilitation of ERC20 trading from any site, and people could earn an affiliate fee through like kind of routing orders through this interface. And that was 0x kind of like first attempt of building their own UX for their protocol. Previously, 0x had been focused on giving grants and building developer tools to expect other people to build on their protocol. And 0x Instant was the first kind of in-house 0x project that was built. And then, as you mentioned, later on, they really went all in on building their own products, including like the flagship Matcha, which I think was a really great decision for them. But a lot of my time at 0x, especially towards the end, was actually focused on the market making side. So building tooling and infrastructure to allow market makers to provide good liquidity in the 0x ecosystem. And that started off as just helping support like the open order book system of helping them post off-chain orders to relayers and getting kind of insights about how to best do that and provide really good tooling for that. But it actually later evolved into developing and architecting the request for quote system, which drives a lot of volume on Matcha right now, which is the concept that there's a lot of really great open liquidity, Uniswap, SushiSwap, all of the DEXs that we know and love. It's great to source liquidity from those sources, but you can also provide really good pricing through doing requests for quotes to private market makers. So when you sign into Matcha and you make a request, in addition to searching all of the open liquidity sources, it also pings private market makers with your Ethereum address, like how much you want to like buy and sell of what asset. And then there are these native market makers that will provide 0x orders to compete with that public liquidity. And because they are signing an order for the specific address that wants to make the trade, they can also like provide customized pricing, like based on that Ethereum address, who they're trading with, which they might have some previous information about, whether they're kind of like a normal retail actor or if they're a bot or, display some other behavior. So that system is now driving, pretty significant amounts of volume for major pairs on Matcha, and then also through 0x API, which powers Matcha and powers like a bunch of other DeFi products.
So what's the financial incentive for them in that case? They can make more money by answering these requests for quotes than by just straight liquidity providing in a DEX?
Yeah, I mean, they can provide custom quotes for different scenarios, and they also have information about the public liquidity sources, which they can try to outprice. And, sometimes they make money. Sometimes they can provide better spreads if they know who they're interacting with and they kind of know what they're competing with as well, right? So the DEX is that when you provide liquidity on Uniswap, for example, you don't anybody could be taking your liquidity. It could be an arbitrage bot, it could be a liquidator bot, it could be a retail consumer. But with request for quote system, you know the actual Ethereum address of who is taking your order, and you also know what the competition is, and you can also provide like just-in-time pricing, right? So instead of just being like, let me delegate like my liquidity to like this, X times Y equals K, like math model, and just kind of let it do its thing. You can, people run these backend servers that, at any given time, based on a variety of, on-chain and off-chain factors, can provide a custom quote given who they're dealing with, as well as external market conditions and what the competition is. So it's like a different kind of archetype of market maker who is providing this service compared to like the, retail Uniswap LP. But when you have these advanced market makers running these algorithms, like providing quotes directly to customers, like with all of that context, you can get really competitive pricing. And then also they're serving them up really gas optimized 0x orders. And when Matcha puts together your, what I affectionately call like an order salad, which might be like 25% Uniswap, like 50% Sushi Swap, whatever, like a different arrangement of different DEX orders to serve the retail customer, it takes into account gas costs. So like if the market maker can provide competitive pricing, and then like the gas cost that it takes to actually execute that is less than, some of the other on-chain DEXs, it makes for like better pricing for the retail customer.
Have you taken a look at CowSwap, by the way? Because some of what you're talking, it's not exactly the same thing with a request for quote, but they do matching between 0x style permits, like in a kind of flashbot way, from what I understand. Have you taken a look at that at all?
I have not seen that. It sounds interesting.
It's cool. I think Gnosis built it. But I think it's like Gnosis V2. I don't really understand the whole Gnosis architecture so well, but it seemed, anyway, it's interesting in a similar kind of wheelhouse.
Cool.
But I actually wanted to know, so we talked about this a long time ago, but like Opensea is based on this Wyvern contract, which I think has like at least some took inspiration from 0x. Is that right?
I mean, I can't say if the developers took inspiration, or not. I don't really kind of like know the whole chain of events there, but I can say that it's like, off-chain orders with on-chain settlement, which is the same model that 0x follows, and kind of the same model that like the original EtherDelta follows.
To me, my experience of it is primarily with through Opensea, and that permit-based model I think is like so essential to what makes gives Opensea its moat. I think its moat comes from its floor price engine, and that's really dependent both on the network effect of people already being there, but primarily that really, but also the free bidding and listing that a permit-based system like 0x or Wyvern have really lets you. It's just cheaper the information just is drawn into Opensea because it's so much cheaper to change the price that you can establish a floor price much more effectively than an on-chain marketplace, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, and just like for the listeners, when you're talking about like the permit-based approach, you're talking about like setting allowances for like, let's say your WETH, for example, like your wrapped ETH, and then being able to make like offers with that wrapped ETH that like you gave allowances for for free, right? So like you could be like, hey, I only have one ETH, but I want to make a one ETH offer on, collection A, collection B, collection C, and you could use that same one ETH to like make a variety of different offers with it. So it's really capital efficient. And I think that is a big benefit to Opensea. And I think that there are other protocols that like instead prefer to kind of like lock up funds for specific bids, or have you do like on-chain actions in order to like make an offer or place a bid and lock up your funds in that way. And I think that is like obviously less capital efficient and like more expensive with gas. And I think that at least on Ethereum L1, that's a bit of a hard sell for like mainstream adoption. But that being said, like the off-chain orders definitely present like some challenges, especially when it comes to centralization. So all the orders that Opensea has are just kind of like signed Wyvern orders that say, I'm willing to buy this item for this price. And those are all stored in a centralized database that you have to rely on the centralized Opensea API in order to distribute. So if their API goes down, or if they choose to no longer support the API, like they basically have a big moat of orders that only they know about that other developers don't. So in a way, it's a little bit of a kind of like liability for the open ecosystem as well.
Totally. And actually, it also opens them up to a real specific vulnerability with, I don't know if we talked about it recently, but the OpenSea API exposing prior permits that people have signed, and maybe the UI not making it super clear that would be the case. So people having their Bored Apes or whatever it is sold at some price that they didn't remember setting. I know that when you go to revoke listing prices on OpenSea, it does queue up like all of the transactions in order to invalidate
Hmm.
all of the prior permits. It would actually be nice gas efficiency wise if they would let you just do it once for all, just do it by nonce or something, and let's be done with it. All of my prior listings, let them be nullified for this token ID. But it also means that like actors that were aware that these permits are still available via the OpenSea API, even if they're not served from the front end, are able to just buy NFTs cheaper than people realize that they've got them listed for.
Yeah, there's like we've seen issues like this happen before too. But think about it from OpenSea's perspective too. In some particular use cases, like imagine I like post an order saying I'm willing to sell my Bored Ape for 50 ETH, and then imagine that like I transfer my Bored Ape like out of my wallet, or like let's say that like yeah, let's say I transfer it out, and then OpenSea stops surfacing that order, but then somebody holds on to it, right? Like in their own private database, and then you transfer the Bored Ape back in, and then if that Bored Ape like didn't reset the allowances, then somebody could kind of execute that order that isn't surfacing in the OpenSea API anymore. So like, there's lots of tricky things to be aware of there.
Right, right. Someone else could be backing up these permits. It's not just, you can't just remove them from the centralized storage. You really do need to write to the chain
Right.
that you're invalidating the permits. When I was working on a project with a friend earlier in 2021, yeah, I mentioned this like nonce idea. Like, I don't know why the permits on a particular NFT couldn't be associated with, so that we could invalidate it. In any case, it's, but
Yeah, so I mean, for 0x orders, like there is this idea of something similar to this nonce idea where it's like and people default to using the timestamp to kind of like every time that they like posted a 0x order, like they associate essentially kind of like a nonce, which is usually like the timestamp, and then you can call this function that's like cancel or all orders up to, which is like I want to cancel all orders that are like less than or equal to this particular timestamp, and then that can kind of like wipe out all of your existing orders on the 0x ecosystem.
yeah, that's nice. That's really handy. And actually, when we talked some time ago, you mentioned that 0x can actually handle NFTs also, right?
Yeah, so 0x from a while ago, I believe it was 0x v2, but I could be wrong about that. I should check my facts. Like has supported 721 and 1155 trades, and that's actually what powers pseudo swap. So pseudo swap allows for like OTC trades, like NFT to NFT, NFT to ETH, NFT to like single NFT to basket of NFTs, and that's all powered through 0x. And there was actually an early product called Box Swap, which I think was 2017, which provided pseudo swap style functionality, but it was before the big NFT kind of like crazed hit, so it like never really got in the limelight or did a huge amount of volume. But like pseudo swap, like trader.xyz style functionality has existed for a while now in the 0x ecosystem. But because 0x was like largely used for trading ERC20s, that's kind of how the protocol fees that were introduced like made it a little bit cost prohibitive to use it for lower priced NFTs. So I think that was a problem with 0x v3, which like kind of like damper the adoption of their like NFT orders. But yeah, they were pioneers, I think, of like the allowing open infrastructure for NFT trading back in the day. And I think now with pseudo swap and trader.xyz and others using it for NFTs, and like with some upcoming stuff coming in 0xv4, I think you're going to see more adoption of it.
That's very cool. All this reminds me of the Zoo token project that you worked on. That was like was it a hackathon at 0x?
Yeah, that was a 0x hackathon project where that was actually like one of the first smart contracts that I actually wrote that like went to mainnet and did real volume, where we developed a smart contract which fractionalized a Cryptovoxels parcel, and it was my understanding that I think that was the first time that happened.
Yeah, it was very cool. So I pulled up the contract deploy transaction, September 22nd, 2020. And if people are listening, they want to check it out. There is this very gorgeous, is it Brooklyn Zoo? Is that what it's modeled on?
It's the Bronx Zoo.
Bronx Zoo, sorry. So zootoken.club, and then you can hit a link or whatever, jump into the voxels. So it's like this beautiful animal-filled zoo space. Maybe tell me a little bit about how the project worked from the start, because people could purchase those zoo tokens, right?
Yeah, so basically this was like a fun experiment in like neighborhood and like community incentives and like governance. So I have always kind of been interested in group ownership and like group governance, and like that has kind of evolved into some of my PartyDAO work as well. But for Zoo Token, I was like, there's a neighborhood in Cryptovoxels called the Bronx. It's like a cool little island that you can walk around. Like I own a parcel there. Like what would it mean for like the community to like co-own and co-manage like a zoo there? So we just like got all the things in place to make that happen. So we commissioned Ogar, who's like a very talented Cryptovoxels builder, paid him an ETH to like do this build of a zoo. And then we said, we're going to write a smart contract to fractionalize ownership of this zoo. So relatively naive, you know, like hackathon style implementation, but it worked. So we deposited the Cryptovoxels parcel into our smart contract, and then we minted, I think it was 10,000 tokens. Yeah, 10,000 zoo tokens. And then the way that it worked is that we gave away some of those tokens to the neighbors. And the idea being that like, would these neighbors be incentivized to make the Bronx like a nicer place, like this island in Cryptovoxels, because they could financially, you know, benefit from this upcoming sale of the zoo, and they have partial ownership in the zoo. So we gave some away to for free to some neighbors. We gave some for free away to some community members in Cryptovoxels. There was like a small Uniswap pool, and we also held a bunch of the zoo tokens in like to be used for governance. And then we like wrote our own kind of like snapshot style like API, where basically we could write up governance proposals that relate to the zoo. So, you know, one thing was like a proposal to, you know, sponsor like the WIT meetup. And another one was like to like for someone to create a meme. So and then this was all leading up to a Dutch auction where the zoo was sold, and then the proceeds were split amongst all the token holders. So like a few months after that, on April 20th, like a Dutch auction started, and the zoo was sold, and then people could redeem their zoo tokens in exchange for like their portion of the ETH of from that sale. So it's kind of similar to some of the other fractionalization mechanisms that you see today, but just like a very special kind of like bespoke like early use case of it.
Very cool to see it as a revenue share for the auction of the zoo parcel at the end. And also, I was looking at the votes and the governance, and yeah, I saw one was for Tom Schmidt to create a meme about the zoo. I wish there was a link to the meme. I want to see what it was.
Yeah, so like we ended up like we had like a community call. We had like a pretty fair amount of community engagement, but like there weren't any like really meaningful proposals that passed through, but it was still just like a very fun experiment. And like it was very cool to see people like buying the token, reselling the token, neighbors getting on a phone call to like discuss what to do in the zoo and like plan events, and then like have this whole Dutch auction mechanism work and somebody actually engage with it. So yeah, I'm proud of that project as like a relatively novel like early experiment in fractionalization.
Yeah, I was reading the contract earlier. People might want to check out the get price function, which does the Dutch auction calculation. It's pretty cool. If people hit the buy function, it calls get price, which calculates the delta between the start time and the end time. And I think essentially multiplies it by the minimum price. So you get the time remaining time times the minimum price. But it's very cool to see a Dutch auction written out in, I don't know, it's only like 40 lines or so, maybe even less.
Shout out to Zero X Squad, because that was largely like inspired by like some Zero X Dutch auction code that was actually written for NFTs as well, but like wasn't really widely used. So it was cool to get inspiration from that. And it's also interesting to see more people do Dutch auctions now. And I think that like the way that we wrote it was like it like ticked down like every block. So like every single block, the price changed. But that basically means that like by the time the transaction hits, like it's like blocks most likely have been mined unless you use like a very high gas price. So like you always need to spend some gas doing like a very minimal refund. So like if I were to do it again, I kind of like these more like step functions where like the price doesn't change every block, like, you know, X amount of blocks go by and then like it ticks down a certain amount, just to like have more close guarantees about like the price that you see is the price that you'll pay, and not like always having to give a minimal refund because of like blocks passing between you deciding on the price, like you deciding to purchase and the purchase actually executed on chain.
We'll get to it later, but I'm curious, is that something that you've realized by working on PartyBid?
not necessarily from working on PartyBid. I think it was actually just seeing those like Dutch auction, like seeing that Dutch auction like happen on the Zoo token, and just like seeing that happen on chain like made me kind of rethink that design decision.
Right, makes sense. And it kind of thematically links a little bit, both in terms of the aesthetic and sort of thinking about marketplaces as experiments with the Rats.art project. I was looking a little bit at the contract. I didn't get as deep into this one, but it's really sophisticated. You're handling 721s, 1155s, issuing tokens. It's a pretty cool contract.
Yeah, so Rats is a really fun project that was a collaboration between myself, a few developers, and like Jay DeLay, who's like very into this like trash art movement. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Love trash
with
art.
that kind of
Love trash art.
subculture.
Rob
Yeah, yeah.
Ness,
So
Max Osiris. Yeah.
hell yeah, yeah. That's like a dope squad of people that are OGs, and I don't think get enough recognition. Like
Underrated.
it,
An
very underrated.
actual
Like they,
art movement, you know?
yeah, like, and it's like got like punk rock, like kind of like anarchist like vibes and aesthetic, like very different squad than like kind of like the clubhouse like foundation like kind of like rise. You know, it's like very. I love those guys, and I think that they have a cool aesthetic, and there's a lot of meaning behind what they do, but it's also done in like a very kind of like fun, playful, like anything goes way. So anyway, yeah, so I teamed up with Jay DeLay, yeah, who's very into this trash art stuff, and we were like, let's think like what kind of like interesting mechanics can we use with smart contracts around like creating an art-based economy, because he previously created a project that was called Spam, SPAM, like spam mail, where basically he was manually like people could send NFTs to this wallet, then he was manually like distributing it at ERC20 that like he minted through some interface. And it started off being like, hey, can we just like automate this? Can you just like make it so when someone sends an NFT, like it automatically gives them tokens? I was like, yeah, but like we can do more interesting stuff than that. So that's kind of how the idea for Rats was born. And it is, yeah, an experiment in an art-based economy. The idea being is that you can deposit any like whitelisted ERC 721 or ERC 1155. We whitelist by contract, not by like token ID. So like you could deposit any Rarible asset, any Zora asset, any foundation asset to this contract, and then it gets put into the vault, and then you can receive a Rats token for your contribution, or you can choose to just take something out of the vault. So you give a piece of art, and then you can get a Rats token, which would later allow you to claim a piece of art in the future, or you just swap it out for any other piece of art in the vault. And then there was like a hard-coded limit of 1,000 Rats tokens that would ever exist. So once there were like 1,000 pieces in the vault, you could no longer, mint new Rats tokens. You could only, swap art for other art. And it's just like a bit of like smart contract as performance art, like kind of a exploration of this like retro aesthetic with this like trash art movement that was just like really fun to see play out.
Absolutely. And it's just cool to see people just having fun with Ethereum, not just trying to make things that are going to be sort of financially incredible or whatever. It's just, it feels more like something like I used to hang out at RISD in Rhode Island Design School. It feels like something you might see. Like I know they have this this shop Second Life where you can like trade in your unused art supplies and get credits at the store to get other art supplies. Feels like that kind of artistic bohemian space, and the aesthetic of the website with the rat art and everything really like makes. I still have a Rats token.
Oh, cool.
I minted, this is like early in my journey, but I minted on, it's the only time I've ever minted on Rarible. I minted
Yeah.
which was very expensive, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
It was not the right choice for this endeavor. In any case, I minted a screenshot of a picture of a cat I had taken, and a screenshot of it in the Photos app on my phone, and minted it. And because I wasn't yet sure, do I want to mint my face to the blockchain? I still not sure actually. Although I guess there's not that much on chain. You could do the call data hacking stuff, but it would be tough to actually put your face on the blockchain. I wonder if anybody has properly done it with on chain something. It would be interesting. So I have a Rats token, so I have to go grab one from there. I saw there's also like a collab with FWB involved.
Yeah, it didn't quite take off as much as we expected. So we were like, Rats is really fun, but it's also very kind of like chaotic, because when we first launched Rats, somebody was just like uploading a ton of photos of like weed. They're just like stock photos that they found, and just like hoarding Rats tokens. And we're like,
Oh,
saying
weird.
like, we love that this is open, but like somebody's just like minting a bunch of low quality stuff and just hoarding Rats tokens. Like, and actually what we ended up doing, we just added like, we just kind of like spoke about like how we weren't like super pleased with that particular actor. Like we were cool with basically like do whatever, the hell you want, but like that just felt like a little bit kind of like not playing like kind of in good faith with like the game we were doing. So we kind of like just added a when you were doing a deposit, we added a warning being like, please just like sign this message confirming that like this is a unique piece of artwork that you created, and like it's some novel thing that like you have the rights to. And like that stopped his behavior just by like having to sign in a message like with that with his wallet or his or her wallet. And then they ended up actually just like giving the Rats token back to the contract as well. So that was just like a nice little social deterrent that stopped that behavior. But anyway, going back to the Friends with Art collab, we were like, okay, this is cool, but like, what if we had more focused vaults that were just for like groups of friends or squads where there's like at least some sort of barrier about who can like trade in and out of it? And that's where we did the collab with FWB, where we basically just forked the contract and added like a token requirement of having 60 FWB tokens. And then we created that vault that was called Friends with Art, which is still around today.
I bet Rats would be a success on Polygon. I feel like people would mess with it there. Maybe some slightly different
Yeah, somebody
tokenomics to handle the scale that you could get. There could be something interesting.
Yeah, so somebody actually just DM'd me about that literally today, or mentioned me on
Oh,
Twitter.
amazing.
So I think there's definitely like an appetite for it. I think that one of the challenges with Rats is that like we rely on this like on ERC 721 or like received like callback behavior, in which you need to trust that the contracts that are getting deposited like are playing by the rules of like
Right.
kind of being honest in their interactions with that. So every kind of new contract needs to be added to this like allow list by an admin. So like, you can deposit any rarible piece, any, super rare piece, any Azora piece or whatever. But a lot of people have their own contracts, and it's kind of gas heavy and just like a logistical pain to kind of like be manually adding new contracts to this allow list. And I would imagine you'd run into the same problem on Polygon. So I think if you had like a dedicated person, especially with minimal gas cost, who'd be willing to like, do a rough review of the contract to make sure it's not malicious and continue adding it to the allow list and then deployed it on Polygon, like I think people would probably have a lot of fun with it.
Absolutely. I know when you were doing it, you were, at least when we were talking about it, you were primarily whitelisting or allow listing contracts that were also verified on Etherscan, which like excluded Opensea. But I feel as much as it's not as cool for not being verified, Opensea on Polygon plus Rats.art, I think people would totally use that, even if it was just that one
Yeah.
marketplace or one minter,
Yeah,
I should
so I
say.
mean, like, yeah, so like everyone was always asking us to add to the allow list, like, the shared OpenSea contract. But, just as a matter of principle, I'm like, I can't read the code to, like,
Yeah.
it's be extremely unlikely that they would have anything malicious with that, like, on ERC 721 receive callback, for example. But I'm like, I can't read this code. And it's kind of like a principle of mine to be able to read the code and just do a quick scan to make sure, this contract makes sense. It's going to act as I would expect with this callback. And I can't do that, so I'm not adding it to the allow list. And that unfortunately excluded a lot of art, and also just like added to, I think you share this, like my kind of frustration with OpenSea not verifying that particular contract. But that's the way I chose to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's silly. They might as well verify it. It's if there is a vulnerability, someone has decompiled it and would have figured it out by now. So what's the only danger is that the code just isn't very nice. Or maybe in order to
Yeah.
verify it, they'd have to reveal comments in the original file that they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to verify. I wonder what the reasoning is, but what's strange is that you would think that OpenSea would have just bought somebody in order to have a better minting contract by now. It's not that complicated to do something better than what they're currently doing. It's strange a little bit. What is the on ERC 721 received? What's the vulnerability if they're implementing a malicious version of that? It's supposed to execute a callback, or what's the like vulnerability specifically?
Yeah, so basically, like, I don't have it in front of me to like go into all the details, but like high level, you just basically trust that like the ERC 721 only calls that like function like when it is successfully sending an NFT to a contract. And like hypothetically, you could write a Solidity contract that just like calls that 1,000 times to like mint 1,000 tokens or whatever, right? So it's just like, do you trust? Does the ERC 721 that you're receiving like only call that when it's actually transferring it to you? I believe that was the idea of it. Although like obviously you could check to ensure to see if that token ID is in your possession. But again, also like you could have a contract that mints things that aren't actually artwork, that just like sends them in bulk to the contract just to mine tokens as well. So again, just kind of like, is this like, are there definitely images associated with this NFT, and is it like behaving well and as I expect with like hitting up this callback? The nice thing about that though is that like most NFT like contracts like make you do two transactions. You need to like set an allowance to the contract, and then you need to like execute a transaction to do the transfer, like now that you've given the allowance.
Right.
But like this callback just allows you to do like what I believe is a safe transfer from, and then append like arbitrary call data at the end that like the receiving contract can decode. So basically when you trade with Rats.art, you send it an NFT, but then you, in the transfer method, you actually encode call data that say, do I want to receive a token, or do I want to swap this with art for art?
Oh,
And if I want to swap this for art, is this a 721 that I want to swap for, or is it a 1155? What's the contract address and what's the token ID? So then the Rats.art contract is like, okay, when I receive an NFT, I look at the call data and I figure out what action to take, whether it's swap art, swap 721, swap 1155, or mint a token to them.
Got it. I see. So this is I'm hoping to one day talk to the 721 co-authors, and this seems like something where I noticed it also in the like approvals for an NFT contract are for an NFT are revoked during transfer if they're implemented to be revoked during transfer, but we have to depend on this, and someone could make a mistake and not revoke those approvals in their NFT contract. And so if you were to, for instance, give, start listing on Opensea, after transfer, that address could still be allowed to list the same token, even though they no longer own it. If it's not implemented, there seems to be something about, and I'm not, maybe you have ideas about this. Like there's something about this ERC way of doing things where we're dependent on implementations of interfaces, but we can't be sure that they actually follow through. I feel like computer science must have already figured out the answer to this.
Yeah, I hear you. I think the off-chain orders for OpenSea are really great, but again, there are those vulnerabilities that we talked about with like the surfacing of orders and whatnot. I think just going back a little bit to like the OpenSea and on-chain or off-chain like infrastructure, I think that even though like there's so much capital efficiency and like zero gas cost to these off-chain orders once you have the allowances set, I think it is really interesting, some of these on-chain marketplaces that are now emerging, like on layer 2s. Like the one that I'm thinking about is the Treasure marketplace that's like has the magic token associated with it. I don't know if
I've seen it, but tell me what's interesting about it.
Yeah, I mean, they basically have Treasure. If you go to treasure.lol and go to their marketplace, they basically have like a marketplace which kind of like rivals OpenSea's kind of like an OpenSea style interface, but everything is denominated in this native magic token instead of ETH. But all of the orders are on chain, which has all these drawbacks that we've spoken about. But it's on Arbitrum, where it's a lot cheaper to post or send out new orders or cancel orders, etc. So it's still a gas cost, but it's much smaller than Ethereum. And then when I was actually writing some smart contracts that interacted with this marketplace on Arbitrum, it was actually really empowering to know that I no longer need to rely on this centralized OpenSea database and the centralized OpenSea API to get all the orders that exist out there. I can just write my own indexer, I can watch the blockchain for events, and I can know that everyone has equal access to all of these orders. So as much as I don't like the gas cost to on-chain orders, I think when you have on-chain orders on a cheap blockchain, there's something really empowering to knowing that everyone kind of has an equal playing ground, for the most part, to be interacting with these orders.
On a product level, I only poked around it a little bit, but the Treasure marketplace, it's also only certain contracts that are available, right? Then it's not any NFT. They're sort of doing a curated marketplace, yeah.
Yeah, but they've been hinting that they're going to have a more open marketplace coming soon. But there aren't even that many meaningful other NFTs other than the ones that they support on Arbitrum right now. But that could change in the future.
That's it. Let's date the show. If you go to Arbiscan right now, the blocks are empty. There's nothing going on Arbitrum. Not much. Whenever I've checked Arbiscan, there's only ever one transaction per block, sort of the minimum. It's very rare. In your experience, have you seen spikes of activity there?
I mean, I've only done a handful of transactions on there, so I can't speak to that. What I think is a kind of more, a little bit, at least something that is more kind of relevant to me is looking at the non-fungible token tracker on Arbitrum, for example, and looking at the ERC 721 top tokens, this could potentially be like a source of alpha to like identify new NFT projects, like just based on the number, like you can kind of, the number of transfers that they have could be approximate, like maybe the number of sales, even though not all transfers are sales. And this is where you can kind of keep an eye to see like, okay, is it really just this treasure ecosystem, which are all these NFTs that are listed, like started off with the word small, like SMOL, or are there other new NFTs that are kind of emerging in this ecosystem? So I think that like using Etherscan or Arbiscan, et cetera, like can be there. It's really nice to have aggregation layers on top of it, like with what Nansen does and like other analytics platforms, but especially for like emerging blockchains like Arbitrum, which might not have integrations in those existing like data analytics, it is always interesting to just kind of poke through these like top ERC 721 transfers. And then also someone I know wrote a bot just to identify, like based on Etherscan's recently verified contracts, like checking all the verified contracts, see if they adhere to the 721 standard, and then just kind of sending a Telegram alert like about all the new ones that are deployed. There's been so much NFT activity that it's just, there's too much noise and not enough signal in that feed. But there was a while there in kind of early NFT days where like that could be a really interesting source of alpha, just to be like, what are all the freaking 721s that are getting deployed to Ethereum? And then even if you can't find them on Twitter, just manually hitting up the token URI function and like looking at the metadata and looking at the images and getting a sense of what was going on, like before a lot of the public knew about it.
Totally. I have something similar set up with Dom's wallet for contract deploys, which was pretty great until corruptions, when most of the contracts are not minting contracts. I guess I could be a little bit smarter about narrowing it down to only ones that have minting functions, but I was being kind of lazy. I was using the Nansen alert bot in Discord. It's useful anyway. But where are you finding those top ERC 721s on Arbitrum? Is that something on Arbiscan?
Yeah, it's on Arbiscan. In the top right, if you go to the left of like sign in and miscellaneous, there's like a token section, and then you can go ERC 721 top tokens, and then it gives you like a list of all the 721s like ordered by the number of transfers in the last 24 hours.
Have you seen the thing on Etherscan that's been around for like 2 years where you can look at 721 collections with the art on, it's like their NFT token tracker page, but almost nobody knows that it exists, but for years you've been able to like view essentially what you can see on Opensea through Etherscan. Have you ever seen that?
I feel like I saw that once, but I haven't revisited it in a super long time.
Honestly, I don't know where it is. I couldn't tell you how to get there, but it's weird. Okay, so Rats, February 9th, 2021. Fast forward a little bit, April 19th, 2021, Solvency.art. Who is Ezra, first of all?
Yeah, Ezra Miller, is my home in New York. He's a pretty like established artist that has been kind of like working on this like generative WebGL art for like the majority of his career. Really talented guy. And Solvency is like an art block style drop where like every piece that was created was like generated via a pseudo random hash, like from on chain, and then that pseudo random hash was fed into his art script that then generated the piece. So this is kind of like the art block style minting that everyone knows and loves. And basically the way that this happened is I got in touch with Ezra through a connection through a friend, and his native art format was digital. He wasn't like, a painter that was trying to get into NFTs. Like he was like a digital generative, like code-based artist, and he had minted on Zora, but he felt like he made these infinite pieces of artwork, and to post them on Zora or Foundation or wherever, like he would basically just have to take like a high quality video for like 3 minutes that was like a ginormous file size, like uploaded, and that was the art piece. And he felt really constrained by that because he's like, my native art form is digital. These are infinite pieces that are made to be seen like in the browser with the code running, and I need to transform it into this like video that has a limited length, and it's just like me recording it for somebody else. It's not people experiencing the true infinite art form with the code running live. So we were just kind of exploring on how to make that happen for him, and that's kind of how we ended up creating Solvency.
It's super beautiful. So Solvency.art, if you're listening. Also, I noticed a little bit of alpha. I wanted to ask you, so you can click on them to see them rendered real-time WebGL 2. Actually, what's the difference between WebGL 1 and 2? What do you know the advantage here?
That's a question for Ezra.
All right, I'll have to invite Ezra onto WebGL Galaxy Brain. So you can interact with them though. Like, so if you go on OpenSea, you see like a sort of clip of the sort of dead fish version in Brad Trammell, not Brad
Yeah.
Trammell, Brett Victor. Brett Victor, who do you know Brett Victor? You familiar?
I don't know the reference.
Yeah, he's like a Apple UX guy. Did Dynamic Land in
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco. Like the future of the library is a computer. Anyway,
Oh, cool.
he has this somewhat popular talk about we haven't yet reached the computer age because we're just like people think like sharing PSD files is like high tech or whatever, but they're not dynamic simulations. They're not, which this is much closer to because you can actually click on the work and have a little bit of interaction, and it's being as proof, I guess, that it's rendering real time. I want to know: are there any other? I know I saw space bars like full screen. I think. Are there any other keyboard alpha tips for exploring Solvency?
No, you found the Easter egg. Like the click and drag is the Easter egg. You have discovered it. Yeah. So
it's really beautiful when you do it.
yeah, and again, like it's so dope that these are infinite. You could literally let this run forever. Like it will keep going. So like that's the beauty of this being like being this bespoke custom thing instead of trying to fit his art form into the static Zora or Foundation Mint where you're just limited to a video or a JPEG or whatever. So as we've seen like play out, like I think just more and more people are going to like appreciate these more kind of like novel smart contracts that do things that are like kind of like only possible with this blockchain technology, like using the pseudo random hash on chain to like generate a generative piece of art that like nobody, Ezra did a bunch of testnet mints and we had an idea of like what this like total collection will look like, but it wasn't until people actually minted them that like actually the minting created the work. And we didn't know, like with photo for example is like a very rare texture, so we didn't know like will there be two photo pieces or will there be zero or will there be one? Like, we couldn't predict that. It was all just based on what pseudo random hashes were generated on chain. It was a really, really fun mint day, like over the course of 12 hours of just like watching this series like actually come to life. And none of these pieces would exist in the same way if like there was a for example, like to generate the pseudo random hash, like we pull them out of USDC and like the ETH USDC like contract on Uniswap. So like if trading activity was different, mint number 410 would look different than it does right now, or if it landed a block before or a block after. So really beautiful to think about that, like each one of these mints is like uniquely enabled by blockchain technology and like exists the way it does because of a variety of on-chain conditions that existed at the time that transaction confirmed.
I think these kinds of collections where the minter, the collector, plays a role in the specific creation of that artwork and the artist couldn't possibly have known what that series of coincidences would lead to, I think it creates like a stronger connection with the person who minted it because they really did play a co-creative role in deciding them. And I don't know, USDC maybe feels warm in its heart or something, but it's actually, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, so the minting function. So when you go to mint, it writes a pseudo random hash to a mapping of token IDs, mapping from token ID to hash. And the way that it does that, I looked it up. It's ABI encode packed, and then you're pulling a bunch of things here. So message sender, transaction gas price, last minted ID, block number, block timestamp, block hash, lock number -1. I'm not sure exactly what that is. The some Oracle token, in this case you chose USDC, but it's actually modular. You could change what the token is. Its balance, the balance of a certain account, which I guess was a large account or something, or
yeah. So I think that was, so this was like the balance. I believe this was the balance of USDC in the ETH USDC Uniswap V,
right?
I believe.
So it's like, I guess hypothetically it is possible to game. You'd have to figure it out very quickly because the thing minted out pretty fast. But I guess you could maybe flashbot that USDC.
You'd have to get a lot of different things right in order to bot this, and then also you would have to figure out like from this is like a big JavaScript file that like generates the piece of artwork, and there is code in there that's like, okay, given the hash, like kind of like what are the attributes, but like you would have to, from the time that the mint opened, you would have to like frantically like try to understand the JavaScript code that like determined what hash would like affect like what rarity characteristic that you were looking for, and then put all like get all these different factors right, like in this big ABI.encode packed function to like make that happen. So maybe technically possible, but like in reality, like very unlikely to happen.
It's a job for Anish. Actually, we should go look at Anish's solvencies just to make sure that he didn't do anything. But even if you were to do that, you'd almost deserve it if you figured all that out and managed to get.
Good on you, like, because that'd be a pretty, that'd be a heroic event, right? And but like the alternative would be like doing, chain link, like VRF Oracle, which like you have to acquire link, and then it's like kind of an asynchronous callback, and like it's a whole thing, right? So this felt, I'm into not being perfect, but being pragmatic, and I think this kind of solution speaks to that.
Yeah, I think it was, there's 500 tokens, it minted out, and you said something like 12 hours. I think I would be very surprised if anybody.
And it's like a bunch of wild like minified JavaScript to like figure out even how to map a particular hash to a particular rarity attribute, which like there's a lot of different things that would have to go there. So we'll watch it. Yeah, there will be a future drop by Ezra. And we'll have to keep a close eye on Anish's account for sure.
That's what I'm saying. But what if you had just packed one other similar like quantity of USD, quantity of DAI in the ETH DAI pool or something? Would it have made it significantly harder, or would someone who had figured out how to game the first one be able to do it no matter how many additional sort of on-chain balances you were to pack? I guess it would make it harder a little bit.
A little bit harder, but still within the realm of possibility. It's just a matter of like how crazy do you want to get with it. So I'd be interested to know the overlap of like, Flashbot, like specialists with like nerds who care enough about this drop, with people who could like, figure out the mapping of the minified JavaScript. Like those are unique people who I would love to have a conversation with.
That's who you want to be talking to with your Solidity, right? That's the ultimate audience for an NFT creator.
Yeah, I mean, because that's just such a deep cut, right? It's like, look at all the things that you had to do to acquire this like piece of artwork too, which is like not even necessarily like a widely mainstream collection, right? So yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that person.
I think I'm not skilled enough to be the one to do this, but I think capture the flags where you're minting the rarest traits of the NFT, essentially an NFT collection where rarity is dependent on how much effort you put into cracking the contract, would be a collection. I mean, I don't know if those people are actually the kinds of people you want owning the token in terms of if you're interested in the floor price of the token, but it would certainly be pretty cool to see like, oh, only the most elite hackers are able to get the golden manny or whatever.
I mean, that's honestly a cool idea, right? It's like, it's a way to be like, okay, you can only get the really dopest version of this NFT if you, like, in a relatively short amount of time are the first person to, jump through all of these, like, kind of like hoops that like takes a true, Solidity nerd / Flashbot nerd to actually pull off. Like, yeah, only the elitist hackers getting it is kind of interesting. I think that this speaks a little bit to what happened with loot, that it's like really interesting to like think about distribution mechanisms that have some sort of barrier to them. So like with when loot came out, like it was still, not everybody knows how to mint from Etherscan, and like not everyone was like as hyped about Dom's work at the time, right? So the people who acquired those loot tokens who were people who like knew Dom, people who knew how to interact with Etherscan and were like willing to spend some gas on something experimental. I think that's what's kind of helped kick off the loot community, because the holders like met some sort of kind of like nerd criteria that like allowed them to acquire the pieces. So I think playing with that more about like kind of distribution through like a little bit of challenging technical skills needed to acquire the pieces, like could actually form pretty interesting communities by getting the tokens in like kind of builders' hands, like just through the distribution mechanism.
Absolutely. Like if builders are essential to a community, having some kind of longevity through future derivative and experience development, attracting those people through the mint process makes a lot. I was actually thinking in a similar sort of vein. Like, it's a shame Twitter just came out with their Hexagon PFP thing. I think it should have been that you have to hold a Twitter NFT in order to get the Hexagon feature, rather than, and they're already going to be doing the wallet authentication. So there's no extra, no challenge for them to do that. So the hashes are generated through this mint, which relies on this pseudorandom hash function. And then, so you've got the hashes on chain associated with the token IDs, but we still don't, or it's only going to be in the front end that they're going to be generating the WebGL artwork, right? Like, how do you manage to get it? I know there was also like an Arweave tie-in, and they are also viewable on Opensea. So how does it get all glued together?
Yeah, great question. So basically, we have this attribute on the contract called Arweave ID. You can see that's set on Etherscan right now. And the idea is that like this entire generative art script is stored on Arweave at the location that is, on the contract right now. So you can go in Arweave, like go to this, 6QM capital WC, et cetera, like identifier, look up that identifier, and that has like this bundled version of the art, and then you can basically, through what I believe is a query parameter, like send in an arbitrary hash for it to render. So even if Solvency.art like went down, you could always go to Arweave, and then you could send in the hash. You could grab the hash from the contract, because like you said, there's a mapping of token ID to pseudo random hash. So you would just grab the hash from the contract, send it in as a query parameter to the art code that you would grab from Arweave, and then you would be able to see your piece. And then all the images that it's loading in that version that's bundled up on Arweave are also stored on Arweave. So it kind of allows for quote unquote permanent storage, as long as like Arweave is still around, that these pieces will always be accessible. So that's kind of like the blockchain historian kind of way of like preserving the piece as long as we can. But practically, you need to have an easy integration for Opensea to be able to understand this piece. And like this was before I think even animation URL was an attribute be surfaced like through the token metadata. Like it was only images and videos. But even animation URL, I think the script is too heavy to really support that inline in Opensea.
Yeah,
And also,
probably.
like, I think it'd be a shame to kind of view this like very beautiful big piece in such like a little rectangle or square that Opensea allows. So, but we wanted an easy representation of this for people to see in their mobile wallets on Opensea. So basically, we had a background job running that would look for every new mint that occurred, like look at the ID and look at the token hash, like from the on-chain event. And then we had these like machines that had high quality GPUs running that would like open up Puppeteer, like a code controlled version of Chrome, like let the artwork run, and then like take a video of it for 10 seconds, and then grab that video, upload the video, and then mark that in the database that the video has been uploaded, as well as take a screenshot. So then when you hit up our like the metadata URI, like solvency.art/API/ whatever your token ID is, it would basically be like, has this background job finished rendering this artwork? If it has, then surface this like video and this image that represents the artwork that was generated through this like automated background worker that was generating these kind of like high quality pieces of it that people could see and see.
I love how insanely complicated this project is to pull off a GPU farm just to get the rendering happening in real time. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because like I'm an early Artblocks user, like I'm an official like advisor to Artblocks. I've been working closely with Snowfro like since they launched on mainnet. And when we were doing this project, we had a lot of conversations about like we really took a hard look at evaluating with Snowfro too, like, is this an Artblocks project? Can this be done on Artblocks? Because they already had all the infrastructure to do this, right? Like they have the background. Well, they have some of the infrastructure to do this for certain types of pieces where like they already had the code to run these background workers, take the screenshots, surface the data to Opensea, et cetera. But what it came down to is that like they wanted everything to be stored on the Ethereum chain, blockchain. So like they want to keep it pure and like not have these, but we had so many assets, like all of these big photographs and like a huge amount of JavaScript that just literally wouldn't fit on the Ethereum chain. It wasn't practical to do it. So because we had to store stuff on Arweave, like it wasn't a good fit for Artblocks, but also we wanted complete control over everything, right? We wanted to be like, hey, when we render these video previews, we want to make sure they're done on good machines, and we want to control all that code. We don't want to defer that to an external company, right? So we decided to take everything in house, and we basically, over the course of, it was like 2 months that we were working on it, but like just like a handful of weeks towards the end that I was really kind of like full time on it, where we just basically had to rebuild a lot of infrastructure that Artblocks already had, but we had to build it from scratch for ourselves just to support this one project. So I think that gave us a lot of superpowers to really tightly control all the different aspects, from the front end that you're browsing to the minting experience to the preview renders that were really important to us and pretty hard to get right. And I think it really kind of gave a lot of power and beauty to the project as well that I think people recognize.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the most recognizable, beautiful projects from that era, and it's really cool to see all the bespoke stuff. So on the token URI, you're using the classic concatenation of like a base URI and then token ID because you're able to do the HTTP Solvency.art /API/ and then token ID. But if I were to hit up the Arweave version, I'm really directly hitting up the JavaScript that generates I'm not going to get the metadata back. Is that right? I'm going to get the WebGL, but not the metadata that something like Opensea would need. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. Like the Arweave is purely just rendering the artwork, and like technically you could expect the JavaScript variables and like get the like get the actual attributes, but it's just for rendering the piece. So I think the base URI is like updatable by the owner of the contract, who is Ezra. So like the idea being like if he, and it might be actually time to do this. This is really at Ezra's discretion. You can change the base URI, but then you can also lock the base URI to say like, I'm never going to change this again for it to be permanent, right? So the idea being that like we'll use Solvency.art /API/ whatever ID, like while we're running the background workers, like until it mints out and like until we generate all the thumbnails. But now like those attributes and like those thumbnails like are static. So we could, and I should speak to Ezra about when he wants to do this, we could basically take all of that metadata and all of those images, like put it all on Arweave and then just change the base URI to be like an Arweave identifier, so that like that metadata, you don't have to rely like on an HTTP server. All of that metadata could just be on Arweave. And then if he so chose to, he could choose to lock that to ensure that it would like never be changed.
It's very cool. Once the API is sort of settled, you could just write the whole thing to Arweave and walk away.
Exactly. But you need that interim, like where you are rendering from your own backend, because like you want to be showing people like previews as they're rendered even before it's minted out, or like before the background job finishes all the jobs.
Absolutely. I guess you're safe because OpenSea and other people are going to be, other marketplaces, et cetera, are going to be doing caching, indexing. But I wonder what Arweave's response time is like. I wonder if it's
well, something that when I was developing, again, this was like before, animation URL was like prominent on OpenSea. And this was actually before OpenSea supported like the AR : / prefix to indicate that something's an Arweave asset. So I was doing another project and I'm like, I really like Arweave, but I don't like that. Like I need to hard code a specific Arweave gateway, which was like, sure, it's the public Arweave gateway that is supported by their team, but like, it's much nicer to, like, it was only IPFS at the time, to be like IPFS : / means just defer to any gateway, iterate through gateway. It's like, I don't care. Just know that this is the IPFS identifier. And when I did Solvency at the time, this was before they had the AR : / prefix. So if you wanted to, serve something from Arweave, you would have to specify an explicit Arweave gateway, which I wasn't a big fan of. I feel like it, kind of throws away a little bit of the power, of it being decentralized.
This isn't the same. This is like a really subtle thing. I feel like OpenSea really greases the wheels for a lot of the NFT marketplace, and it's really not necessary long term. But I like OpenSea. I think it does good work, even though I have some reservations about it. But one of the things that I think is more controversial and under discussed, I talked about it a little bit with Ian when he talked to me a little bit about Solidity and stuff. Uniswap was the one who pushed through base 64 as the token URI. And if it weren't for somebody like Uniswap pushing their weight around, OpenSea wouldn't have adopted it, similar to the AR : //. And this is something where like, yeah, token governance, whatever, everybody wants revenue share on that 2.5%, whatever. But actually what's more important for the tech is that we be able to, I don't particularly want to democratically vote on it, but if someone has a cool idea and it requires that you read token URIs that don't look like prior token URIs, it's a shame that we all just have to imitate what OpenSea does.
100%. I think that's actually a really, really excellent point. Like, I think that's a great thing for people to know about. And two notes on that, that for me as you were speaking, it's like Uniswap v3 is epic. Like they introduced not only like really novel like liquidity positions that you can take, like these concentrated liquidity positions, which is just like a technical marvel, and then they're like, let's also make these on-chain SVGs that are dynamic and really, really dope. And like Pioneer, they have the base 64 like encoded like on-chain SVG. Like they really went above and beyond, and I give them a huge amount of credit for that.
Absolutely. The V3 NFTs are chef's kiss. Like, wow, they really didn't have to
Absolutely.
do that, and they did.
Although there was a brief period where I think some people didn't understand that they were actually like the real position themselves, and
Oh
they thought
no.
they were just collectibles that weren't related, and they sold off like some expensive LP positions for not a lot of money. But yeah, there's always dangers in this crypto world that you gotta look out for. But on OpenSea, it's like there's this whole trend of OpenSea competitors, and anytime there's any issue with OpenSea, everybody wants to spin up their OpenSea provider, or talk crap on them, or insist that like they are not great because they have all this money, but like this specific feature request isn't done. But I have a lot of respect and admiration for OpenSea. I mean, these founders were around during like when nobody really cared about NFTs, and
Absolutely.
they were grinding for a long time, and when like nobody would take them seriously, or like take the NFT ecosystem as a whole seriously. Like they are OGs that have been around for a long time. And like there's a lot of infrastructure that people don't appreciate if they haven't been software engineers at scale, organizations that have to scale. Like they support a huge amount of traffic, and they're scaling Django servers, like and dealing with a huge amount of off-chain orders and on-chain validation. And they generally do a good job, and they've been around since the beginning. And I think people underestimate what it takes to operationally, like even just keep the OpenSea website up. And people who think that they can build it in a weekend, like a hackathon, and compete, not just on like scalability and reliability, but also on network effects and like smart contracts, etc. I think are like a bit naive. Not to say there are not going to be competitors that gain market share. Not to say that they're going to be the only game in town forever. I think I have some kind of like theories on that. But I just want to say, shout out OpenSea. People talk crap on too much.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know Devin and Alex a little bit, Devin a little bit better. And, you're 100% right. They've been grinding. People didn't care. They didn't do something like create their own token, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They don't require you to use OpenSea token to make purchases in their marketplace. And that's probably got a
Yeah.
lot to do with their success. Not that it won't work for
Yeah.
Treasury on Arbitrum, but it is nice that,
Yeah.
it is a pretty good UX. Like everybody who complains about it really has not experienced the full on-chain. If everything was on-chain, it just wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same vibe.
Mm-hmm.
So they do a lot of great stuff also in that kind of the layer that people don't want to do, which is Web 2, DevOps,
Mm-hmm.
server uptime kind
Yep.
of stuff. And also all the downtime. I heard someone say the other day that they've been down 100% of the like days of the year or something. I don't know if that's true, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like, nobody talks about the Twitter fail whale anymore. I don't really, I'm not worried about
Mm-hmm.
OpenSea's network effect. I think they're going to do just fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this also kind of like leads me to something that I've been thinking about too, is like we've seen with ERC20s with like regular token sales and dexes, is that there used to be that you would go to one particular marketplace to do your trading. Like maybe you'd log on to Uniswap, or EtherDelta back in the day, or whatever to do your trading. But now I think a lot of the people that do a lot of trading and want to get the best prices use aggregators like 1inch and like and I'm really keeping a close eye on and really fascinated about this idea of these NFT like liquidity aggregators like Genie and Gem.xyz, because
Totally.
I think we're going to see something similar happen in NFTs, where even though OpenSea is the biggest marketplace, with LooksRare and like other marketplaces coming up on the scene, like there is liquidity fragmentation that's happening, where if you want to buy a CryptoPunk or Bored Ape or whatever, it is really advantageous to know all of the orders from all different marketplaces. And to date, most of the competitors to OpenSea have basically offered the same functionality, but with LooksRare, they started offering, and I know some other protocols are going to introduce this soon too, collection-based offers. So you're like, I can make an offer that like I'm willing to pay 50 ETH for any Bored Ape, not
Right.
just Bored Ape 123,
Almost
right? So
NFTX
like that in
style.
itself. Yeah, exactly. NFTX style. And NFTX has liquidity too, right? Which surfaces through these aggregators. So I am really I think that like it's not that like we're going to see somebody come and just provide the same functionality to OpenSea like with a token around it, and like it's going to take the market share and like everyone's going to go to that new place. I think we're going to see more novel sorts of liquidity, whether that be NFTX style, whether that be collection based orders, whether like what Owen's doing with like the new pseudo swap stuff.
Yeah. Very
That are
interested
we're
in
going to see
that.
a lot. Yeah, we're going to see a lot more interesting experimentation with liquidity, and these people are going to start going to these aggregators as opposed to individual places.
Do you think NFT AMM makes sense? I'm not sure if it. I'm not sure that I understand why. I guess if I'm just trying to trade on the floor, I might as well be using an AMM.
I think it's really hard. Like with ERC20s, like you can like with Uniswap, time, weighted oracles, like you can get on-chain oracles like for like token prices, and people use this on mainnet in production, and it works because like there's enough volume, like an activity, and like incentivized actors, right? But for NFTs, like there's no like reliable on-chain oracle for what a floor price is, right? And like that you trade them in whole items for the most part, which are like kind of hard to design around. There's a lot of design challenges. So I don't feel like I have the answer or even like a super strong design on how to make NFT AMMs happen. I think NFTX is a really interesting approach that hasn't quite hit its stride yet, but I like the team a lot and kind of like experimentation. So we'll see what happens, but it's super exciting, right? Because it feels like we've already seen this happen with ERC20s, right? Where we saw order book style with 0x and EtherDelta, and then we saw the Uniswap's AMM come and change the game, and now we see all these alternatives on the Uniswap balancer, or like these Dutch auctions, or these like other ways to do the AMM model, and like we're only seeing the beginning of that for NFTs, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting to see where a year or two from.
Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty skeptical of the aggregator argument for usurping Opensea, and I don't think it will really do that. But one thing that I notice in my own behavior is, look, if I can get a cheaper gas transaction for the same action on Gem or on Genie, or maybe on SudoSwap eventually, I don't know. I'm going to do it there. And also the interfaces of both of those, Genie and Gem, feel much more responsive than Opensea. So if they can like gas golf Opensea and provide a snappier feeling UI, and if it has reliable data, I mean, it's not fundamentally different from Opensea in the sense that probably the majority of the things that I'm buying are coming from Opensea API listings, but nevertheless, it is interesting. So far, I feel I haven't been touched so much by the liquidity that's available on NFTX or LooksRare. I feel like NFTX I'm a little bit behind the curve on, and that there are real opportunities to use that and have a positive experience, but I don't feel like I'm missing that much from Rarible or LooksRare yet.
I think you're right. I don't think you're missing it yet, but I think like as you see these more novel, again, I don't think it's like, oh, LooksRare is going to get a bunch of OpenSea style orders. I think that like LooksRare and SudoSwap are going to introduce these novel liquidity sources that will get more kind of activity over time. So I don't think the argument for like the liquidity sourcing from different liquidity sources is that compelling yet, but I think it will be. And I'm really excited to see how that evolves. And I also think just like buying items in bulk is like not something you can do in OpenSea. If you want to sweep the floor of a bunch of low price collections, you don't want to do a bunch of transactions. That makes sense to me. So for those reasons, I think they're pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that space develops.
Okay, so we've talked about all the projects that come to mind that are sort of Steve Klebanoff projects, but we haven't talked about the one that is your hottest flame for the past while, PartyDAO and PartyBid. Actually, can you tell me a little bit, like, so I guess maybe give a couple sentences on PartyBid. I'm sure everyone knows what it is, but what is it that you do working on PartyBid? And maybe are there any interesting mechanisms in PartyBid that Solidity engineers would find interesting to learn about?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, PartyBid is a DApp that allows people to buy NFTs as a group, either through auctions or through like Zora or Foundation auctions. You can kind of participate as a squad and win those auctions, or now you can buy items directly from OpenSea as a squad. And upon purchasing them, they get fractionalized via fractional.art, and you can potentially like share in the gains, like if they're resold in the future. So that's high level what PartyBid does right now. And the origin story of PartyBid is a long story, but high level, I think it's important to just understand some takeaways. Is that like PartyBid was built by PartyDAO, which was a DAO that was formed for the purpose of building software, and this is like the first flagship product that was built. It was funded by like a 25 ETH mirror crowd fund.
That's crazy. You guys all eating ramen or something? That part I don't understand.
When ETH, it's gone down since the ETH price has drawn down, but like When the ETH was a bit higher, I remember the metric was about 500K in revenue that we had produced, which we used to fund development. So it's taken a big thing that I think is cool about PartyDAO is that like it took fees from the very beginning, and they were reasonable fees for providing a helpful service, and that then funded future development.
It's like 5% or something like that, but now it's half in the project token and half in the So it goes to fractional, and then 2.5% of the fractional is handed over to the PartyDAO, and then 2.5% on top of the winning bid, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I will say that like Anna is the Solidity dev for PartyDAO. Like I've largely worked on the front end and like helped with the architecture and the review of Solidity, but she's really the master behind it all. And I think she'd be the best person to really speak about like the interesting ways in which we account for like your contribution and how many tokens you get, et cetera. But I think something that I was more involved with recently that I think is kind of a cool way of doing things is the way that we approach the Opensea, like adding Opensea integration, where we went from only supporting auctions, like ascending price ETH auctions, to now being able to buy any item on Opensea.
Yeah, I don't know if the market has like priced this into PartyBid yet. Like, I have people been using that like crazy, or because to me this is such a cool feature. I didn't think it was possible.
People have been using it, but what we've noticed, which we're actually like, I've spent a lot of my day working on this. It's coming very soon, maybe by the time this podcast is released. The problem is that the Opensea market moves quickly, and people aren't always fast to get all the ETH together in a party. So basically, let's say, I see Solvency, number 20 is for sale. I'm going to start a party. It takes a few days to get the ETH together, but by the time that the ETH is together, Solvency number 20 has sold. And the smart contract was designed to only allow that party to purchase that specific token ID, right? So you need to wait for the party to expire, and then you claim your ETH, and you're just kind of sad, right? So that's the major problem that we had. We've had a lot of successful Opensea purchases through PartyBid, and that's great. But we've also seen ETH come together over time just to see the item get delisted or sold. But we're solving that in this next release, where we now have collection-based parties that are like, you're still targeting a specific collection. Let's say, we want to target the Solvency collection, but then the party creator specifies like a list of what deciders, at least internally in the Solidity, which are people who are allowed to pick the specific item. So that means like, we're going to raise money to buy a Solvency piece, but I'm going to defer to Steve and Nicholas to be the ones to actually decide which Solvency piece is it that we actually buy.
So picking token ID from contract, same contract address.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Just removing the token ID and like a few other changes, right? So then that allows you to not have this problem where the item gets delisted or sold and like you just have to claim your funds and kind of move on to the next thing. So
is the party at all times targeting a single token, and then they can just change what token it's pointing at?
No, it's like the token ID is essentially empty, and then when the purchase occurs from the decider, they send in the token ID and stores that with the one that is purchased.
Oh, interesting. Okay, you talking about this made me think it would be interesting to be able to point it at NFTX also. Like, let's just buy a floor or whatever.
Well, so this kind of goes into a little bit about how the Solidity works, which I think is pretty cool. So when we were trying to develop, like, how can we get this contract to buy stuff from Opensea, we're like, I don't know if you looked at the Wyvern like order format, but like it's really flexible. It's actually very cool and very impressive, but it's just really hard to reason about because
there's like 32 fields or something.
Oh my God, dude, it's insane. And like they all contain encoded call data. Like you can't just look at the order and be like, oh yeah, this is an order punk for 25 ETH. It's like you can't decipher it easily as a human, and there's a million fields. It's hard to deal with. So when we first started doing this, we were like, okay, we have specific market wrappers that know how to deal with Zora auctions and, foundation auctions. Like we just need to, go down and figure out how these Wyvern orders work and like write a specific, Wyvern integration for this like new code that we were writing that internally is called party buy, like in the contracts. And then I actually went down that route, and it was just so hard to deal with these like Wyvern orders. I was getting pretty frustrated. And we had a call where we're jamming and like just trying to figure out what's the right way to go about this. Do we just need to keep grinding on this bespoke Wyvern integration? But then we kind of came up with this approach where we're like, there is an Opensea SDK that generates these for you. It makes it very simple. Like you just call a JavaScript function with like, parameters that make sense, and then it constructs the transaction for you. So we were like, why don't we just grab the transaction data that's generated from the Opensea SDK and then pass that as like raw call data into the contract, and then just kind of ensure that the NFT that we expect to be bought is like received like custody by the contract after that call data is executed. So when you raise enough funds and then buy something from Opensea, actually what happens underneath the hood is that you send in a transaction with like a function calls like buy, and then you specify like a target contract, which is like the Wyvern smart contracts and target call data. And then it sends, and also I think the value of ETH that the item costs, it kind of delegates to call that contract with that arbitrary call data with that amount of ETH. And then it just ensures that the NFT that you expect to buy is now custodied by the smart contract. So then that allows us to, hey, we want to write a Rarible integration. We want to write a looks rare integration or whatever. All we need to know is how to generate that call data. And then the Solidity contract just checks that NFT was received. And we also have like an allow list functionality where we're like, we only allow, right now, it's only the Wyvern smart contract is like the only like target address that is kind of allowed to be forwarded to. But like that's controlled by governance, and like we could add items there as well.
So you're spinning up the transaction, you're constructing the transaction using the SDK on the front end, but then the contract is going to verify that it's received the right token that it was anticipating?
Exactly, yeah. So like we had to fork the OpenSea SDK to like like the OpenSea SDK by default would just kind of like start executing the transaction. So I forked it to just return me the call data that it generated, and then I just passed that call data to our smart contract and with like Wyvern as the target contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like a little bit of a sacrifice in terms of you need the PartyBid front end in order to be able to generate the OpenSea dependency, or I guess the forked version.
You don't necessarily need to. Hypothetically, you could do it without it. It's just extremely convenient to do it through the interface.
Got it. That's super cool. And you mentioned PartyBuy. I don't know if you want to talk about that here or keep that for the future.
Well, I mean, PartyBuy is just an internal name for kind of like the OpenSea collection purchasing that we've been speaking about. Yeah, we have something new that what we're working on, which I was describing, where you can kind of like target any item like with a specific set of deciders. That's called collection buy. That got merged into master, and like we're working on getting the front end up very, very soon to play with that.
That's very cool. So with this fantasy I have of like an NFTX floor PartyBid, is that viable with what we were just talking about? I guess it might be harder because you wouldn't be able to specify the specific token, or it would be unnecessary to do that, I suppose.
Well, basically what you would do is like you would start up a collection bot, which is what I described with no token ID. You rely on the deciders to choose what the token ID is. And then if we added the NFTX contracts to our allow list of like targets that are okay to execute, then you could basically have the front end kind of generate the transaction data to like purchase a specific item from the NFTX vault. Like I think there's a different, like by default, I don't know if this is still the same way it works. Like when you buy from the NFTX vault, you can pay extra to choose a specific item. So I think it would only work that particular approach. So you're like the decider would log on to the PartyBid website and then be like, okay, I want to source this purchase through NFTX. And then I want to pay the extra to like, buy ID 15 and then have the SDK generate the call data and like pass that in as the target call data. And then as long as the NFTX contracts are like added to the allow list by governance, then like the whole.
Got it. That's super cool. Wow. Okay. So collection buy, party buy. This is very cool. And you did also mention that like PartyDAO is not just a PartyBid, the people who brought you PartyBid, but other things coming in the future. It's kind of exciting.
Well, I mean, as of right now, PartyBid is the product that we're focusing on, and we don't have any like short-term plans to like iterate on anything that's like dramatically different than PartyBid. But I would say that like the behaviors that we've seen on PartyBid we're super excited about, and we're like very bullish on collective ownership, not just for. I think there's a few different use cases that PartyBid support, and I think that PartyBid supports, and like we're very excited to kind of like keep empowering people like with those use cases. And I think those use cases are varied. Like there's groups of 300 people that want to buy a CryptoPunk together and like just resell it from later. There's small groups of people that want to buy like lower priced items, but maybe it's only 3 or 4, and it's like a tight knit group that like maybe wants to delegate governance in the future of that item. And I think that there are also just like communities that want to kickstart their DAO with PartyBid, where like, hey, we want to create a community, we want to create we want to create a token associated with our community, but we want that token to be backed by an NFT. So you see, people kickstarting kind of like DAO, like bootstrapping DAOs, or communities through like kicking off a PartyBid. So there's a few different, those are all really interesting different use cases that like we continue want to support, and I think we're only going to see more of them in the future.
That's awesome. Okay, one last topic I wanted to cover. I know we've been talking for a while, but one last thing comes to mind, and that is I wanted to talk to you about tooling. Are you a Dapp Tools pilled? And what do you think about the state of tooling today?
Yeah, I mean, I was like a hard hat guy for a while. Well, first of all, I'm a very much a TypeScript guy. Like I need strong types. So like I love type chain, which I don't know if you've used before, but
Yeah.
you basically give it, you give it an ABI, and then it generates like a strongly typed like JavaScript or TypeScript interface to interact with. So I really like types. So like I had this like hard hat like type chain kind of like base repo that like I was always using as my starter repo for a while, and I really liked having the tooling for the strong types and everything reasonable. But recently, I heard everyone talking about Foundry and Dapp tools, and I decided to give it a try. And I would say the biggest thing is just DS test allows you to write unit tests in Solidity instead of JavaScript, and that has changed the game entirely for me after like a bit of a learning curve. I think that you don't realize how much the context switching when you're writing Solidity and then having to write your tests in JavaScript or TypeScript, especially if you're doing kind of test-driven development, how much of kind of like a bit of a mental strain that takes and slows you down. Now that I'm using DS test to write my tests in Solidity, like everything feels so much more natural and better, even though there is a bit of a learning curve, like some gotchas.
So DS test is a part of Dapp or Dapp.tools.
That's part of Dapp tools. It's also like what everyone who's using Foundry is using
Okay,
as
it's
well.
the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, so Foundry is very cool. It's like extremely fast. Disclaimer, I only have limited experience with both of these. Like most of my experiences with, hard hat. But from what I've seen so far, Foundry is like extremely fast, which is awesome, but it's very new. Like for example, like just verifying a contract on Rinkeby didn't work for me, and like is a knowledge issue, and I think still does not work at this very moment. So like
I guess we're booting up Remix again, huh?
Yeah. Well, now I have this combo where it's like I build and test like for development, like using Foundry, but then to actually deploy, I'm using Dapp tools. But like they have very similar interfaces, and like they both are friendly with DS tests. So like that's the flow I've been taking recently. But I think the big thing for me is just like I would recommend, even if you just have a few hours, if you're a Solidity developer, just take the time to use DS test, whether it's through Dapp tools or through Hardhat through Dapp tools or Foundry. I think you should see what it's like to write your tests in Solidity. I think it really changes.
I'm super excited about that. That's the next thing on my list. I also saw there's a Foundry tutorial Wilson Cusack put together that people were passing around a little bit. Yeah, I'm excited to follow that. So like just the basic idea of how DS test works, because I think it makes perfect sense. There was some slightly mean tweet. I don't know if it was you. Someone was saying writing tests for Solidity in JavaScript is like learning dyslexia or something like this.
That was not me. That's a hot take. I mean, I try to keep it more positive. It's just like, yeah, it's great to do. It's great to do. And overall, if you're writing tests, good on you. No matter how you're doing it. Like
true enough.
Writing tests, all Solidity developers don't care that much how you do it, as long as you do it thoroughly.
True enough. But so DS test, it's a contract that you inherit into the contract that you're intending to test, right?
It feels a little bit unnatural because like I'm used to JavaScript where like I know there's kind of like clear expectations about like how to write helper functions or like how to mock out users, and like it doesn't feel as natural when you're using DS test. And again, I'm not an expert at it. I've just kind of written one particular test suite in it. But the big thing for me is like one of the big things is like when I change an interface on a contract, when I'm in Hardhat and type chain, I need to now generate, like, even if you automate this, you're now generating new type chain wrappers and then looking at all your JavaScript calls and seeing what's not compiling. And like, it's really nice to just instantly, you update your Solidity contract and now you have your tests in Solidity that now are instantly complaining about you. And you just kind of feel like, you're in one environment instead of having to switch between two. And that's like really added to some flow state.
Yeah, I have to admit, I appreciate Hard Hat Deploy and Ronin,
Mhm.
Sanford, Wigglewag stuff, but I can't. All these libraries in Hard Hat that are overriding or like are adding functionality to ethers and stuff, I find it a
Mhm.
little bit confusing. And also all the like, I think we were talking about it the other day, like all the kind of invisible magic added to global scope in Hard Hat, I find really confusing.
I feel like you also end up with just a huge amount of dependencies at the end of the day, or at least
Yeah,
I do too, where I do npm or yarn install, and I'm just like, what is all this stuff, right? And like it's rare, but there have been cases where there have been like malicious npm packages that have been published that like are used for crypto projects that just like forward on private keys, for example, as well. Not to say there can't be malicious packages in other tool sets, but like I am a bit wary of just the huge dependency tree you usually end up getting into if you have like a non-trivial, like JavaScript based like testing or deploy suite.
absolutely. And if you're working with another developer and they already have some kind of like a hard hat config and package JSON and
Mm-hmm.
it's got all this stuff in it, you don't want to change it too much, but it's like, I don't know what goes on inside of most of these packages. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, it reminds me a little bit. I think about that sometimes also when installing helpful extensions in VS Code. Not exactly the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, but I do wonder. I mean, the
Yeah.
some of these odd Solidity extensions. I don't know. Just because it's got like 100,000 downloads doesn't really mean anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the truth is you need to stay vigilant out there in crypto because there's a lot of scammers and there's a lot of really smart scammers that can do things, like, do a hostile takeover of a popular NPM package or replace your favorite interface like with one that, presents a transaction that you're not actually deciphering on your ledger when you're clicking yes. You're like, oh yeah, it's just some random call data, like probably is right. There's a lot of things to be mindful of.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking about the Opensea call data. Like I noticed, I can tell you that it's 32, or I think I'm right about that there are 32 elements because I was doing it on a hardware wallet and I had display all the call data option enabled. So I was like,
Oh my
it's
God.
like 3 clicks to the right and then confirm for every single one. It's just like impossible.
I mean, think about how much liability there is just on the OpenSea front end, right? We think a lot about Solidity smart contracts like security, like the front end is really important too. It could generate malicious call data that most people don't check. So there's just like a lot of different layers of security to think about and not take for granted.
Absolutely. Steve, it's been amazing talking to you. Where should people follow you on the web?
Yeah, find me on Twitter, Steve KLBNF. That's the best spot to hit me up.
And you're mostly working on PartyBid. Any other cool projects coming up you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, I'm working on PartyBid a lot. I'm also, working with Ezra on an upcoming drop, and
Cool.
I also do angel investing and advise a few companies as well, and then spend a decent amount of my time just doing degenerate exotic DeFi and NFT stuff as well. So I know how to keep myself busy.
Keeping up with the times. Yeah. You and I met for the first time in New York for NFT NYC, and Steve is one of my favorite Twitter accounts. Talk straight truth directly to the timeline, so it's always fun to hang out and get to catch up.
Hell yeah, dude. Awesome meeting you in New York. Always awesome catching up with you. And this was a great conversation. So thank you so much for facilitating it.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, and hopefully we'll get to talk to Anna about more party bid stuff in the future. Pretty excited about everything you're working on. So thanks so much.
Absolutely, dude. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Solidity Galaxy Brain. I put extensive links to the topics we discussed in the show notes. Links to subscribe to the podcast are available at soliditygalaxybrain.com. You can keep up with me on Twitter at Nicholas with 4 leading N's. Until next time.